Sorry to keep you waiting. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth testified before the House Armed Services Committee on Wednesday and the Senate Armed Services Committee on Thursday. This marks Hegseth's first testimony under oath since the war with Iran began on February 28th. Friday, tomorrow, is March 1st, and it's also the 60th day of this armed conflict. And under the War Powers Act, passed in the immediate aftermath of Vietnam in 1973, they passed this to prevent another quagmire. And according to the War Powers Act, a president can only commit U.S. soldiers overseas to fight a war for 60 days, and then after 60 days, that president must have congressional approval to continue the war. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the war, so Republicans are reluctant to call this what it is, a war. They'll say, well, ground troops have not yet been deployed. Really? Because 14 are dead and more than 300 are wounded. Speaker Mike Johnson said, quote, the U.S. is not currently in a state of active kinetic military bombing. Therefore, he sees no need to push for a war authorization tomorrow, when, by law, one must be passed or it's over. 3,600 Iranians have died since this not a war first started. One of our Tomahawks killed at least 175 children when we accidentally bombed an elementary school that our Navy mistook for a military base. All this while the Pentagon is asking for $1.5 trillion for the 2027 budget and a $200 billion emergency not a war supplemental. They want Congress to pass a not a war supplemental to pay for the not a war in Iran. And Donald Trump, meanwhile, refusing to end his blockade of Hormuz, he is now choking off 20% of the world's oil, 30% of the world's fertilizer. Iran reportedly said today they are willing to open up Hormuz if the United States will, but Donald Trump says the United States, will not open up the Strait of Hormuz until Iran agrees never to build a nuclear weapon. Well, they agreed to that in 2003 and 2015. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. Yes, they enrich uranium up to 60% to piss people off, but they have no nuclear weapons program. Hegseth's testimony Wednesday and Thursday was under the cloud of new reporting that Iran's damage to the 7 American military bases throughout the Persian Gulf, that damage has turned out to be far worse than Hegseth, Trump, or anyone in the Pentagon is willing to admit. And they left our soldiers and their families in the Persian Gulf and their living quarters totally unprepared. They were unable to protect themselves from swarms of Iranian drones, Iranian jet fighters, and missiles. We've reported on the $700 million AWACS that got destroyed on the runway at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. We've also reported on the American embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, being destroyed, an embassy where our CIA field office is located, where hundreds of Americans work and would have died had the Iranians not taken the niceties of phoning in the airstrike in the early morning. We've reported on the 6 soldiers killed in Kuwait and scores injured the day after the bombing campaign began. Killed, injured, with no access to medics or ambulances. This is according to exclusive reporting by CBS News. The wounded were forced to commandeer civilian automobiles in order to get to a hospital 30 minutes away. We've reported that American soldiers and American military personnel are being housed in apartment buildings and hotels because it's not safe for them to live on our military bases scattered throughout the Persian Gulf. We've reported how this is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. Armies are forbidden from housing soldiers during wartime with civilians because it's against the law to use civilians as human shields and or place them in harm's way. Harm's way because you're forcing innocent civilians to live alongside soldiers with targets on their backs. But now it gets worse. There are reports that retaliatory strikes by Iran have done billions of dollars in damages to runways, barracks, command and control centers, to practically all our military bases in the Persian Gulf. These are military bases equipped with air defense weapons and jet fighters, and somehow Iran was able to poke through. According to some reports, NBC News is reporting that one Iranian fixed-wing aircraft, not a drone, not a ballistic missile, an Iranian jet fighter, an F-5, was able to swoop in and partially destroy U.S. base Camp Bering in Kuwait, which is home to hundreds of military personnel and their families. We're getting reports that it would cost billions to repair the damage done to the 7 American military bases spread throughout the Persian Gulf. None of this has been told to Congress or the American people, at least until this week when Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, testified before the House and Senate on Wednesday and Thursday. The hearings supposedly were about budgeting for fiscal year 2027, the $1.5 trillion they're trying to raise from Congress. The House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, they're the ones who have to finalize the appropriations bill for our Pentagon. And they hold hearings like these to see where our money is going or where it's not. And because we're in the middle of a war that's not a war that Pete Hegseth couldn't tell us what it cost or will cost, these hearings ended up being contentious, to say the least. Jack Reed of Rhode Island is the ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee. That means if Democrats get control of the Senate, he would be chairman, although I think he may be retiring. Senator Reed on Thursday cautioned Pete Hegseth at the beginning of the proceedings to try to answer questions for the American people and not for Donald Trump. But Hegseth couldn't help himself. Today or Wednesday, every answer to any question that was threatening to him or embarrassing to the president was met with insults, cockiness, and aggressive whataboutisms. Hegseth is clearly a fascist. Let me repeat. Hegseth is clearly a fascist, inconvenienced by congressional oversight, and he would want nothing else but to rid his Pentagon of checks and balances. I have warned repeatedly on this show that second to Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth is the most dangerous person in the United States. He is a theocratic fascist, a transphobic racist, a misogynistic bigot who sees the war in Iran as the final battle between Christianity and Islam. We've gone over his religious beliefs, his political beliefs. In his heart, women should not be allowed to vote. Muslims should not be allowed to serve in our government, let alone be allowed into our country. He does not believe in democracy or the government established by our founding fathers. He believes, Pete Hegseth believes in the supremacy of Christian law over American law. But what is Christian law? What his church leaders say it is. They're not quoting Jesus, they're quoting some cherry pickings from the Old Testament. Pete Hegseth believes the only thing that will save America is if the elders from his church, from his Protestant denomination, decide who and what is an American. This is not hyperbole. This is fact. It's in Hegseth's writings, his actions, his comments, and behavior before Congress this week. Like any crazed Christian nationalist, Hegseth is unshakable in his belief, cloaked in his bourbon-soaked interpretation of the Bible and the Constitution, hiding like a coward behind our troops and flag, a flag he uses as a handkerchief to blow his nose into. Pete Hegseth cannot be humiliated or convinced that he's a war criminal, which he is. Pete Hegseth, by every definition of the term, is a war criminal. You do not reason with war criminals. You do not reason with fascists. You do not appease war criminals. You do not appease fascists. Pete Hegseth is a fascist and a war criminal, and he must be removed from the Pentagon and then frog-marched before an American judge and held accountable for the hundreds, if not thousands, of war crimes Pete Hegseth committed in direct violation of war crime statutes passed in 1996. I urge all members of Congress and the American people to stop worrying about The Hague and the International Criminal Court, which we're not signatories to, or the World Court. I urge everyone to read the War Crimes Act of 1996, signed by President Bill Clinton, into law on August 21st, 1996, U.S. Code 2441. It established criminal penalties for grave breaches of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. It makes violating the 1949 Geneva Conventions against domestic law. Members of our armed services must obey the 1949 Geneva Conventions as of 1996, the War Crimes Act of 1996. I urge you to read this law, and you would conclude that by every definition of a war crime, Pete Hegseth is guilty. The targeting of alleged narco-terrorists in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific that started back in September, those are war crimes under American law. Forget international maritime law, the rules of engagement set up by the Geneva Conventions. I'm talking about American law. That double tap where they circled back to kill survivors of that drone strike, which our military did. They said, we did it. That is a war crime. Punishable, by the way, because more than one person was killed, according to the War Crimes Act of 1996. That is punishable by execution. And there's no statute of limitations, meaning Hegseth just won't be able to travel to Europe without getting arrested by the World Court if and when the United States ever decides to obey the rule of law. Pete Hegseth will be put on trial here in the United States for war crimes. I don't know when it's going to be, 10 years from now, given he's 45 years old, 50 years from now. They're still rounding up Nazi war criminals and their collaborators. This war in Iran and the airstrikes over the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, those airstrikes in Yemen where Hegseth targeted an Ethiopian refugee camp, those are, by every estimation of what constitutes a war crime. Not on the international stage, here in the United States, according to the War Crimes Act of 1996. I'm going to show you highlights from Hegseth's hearings before the House and Senate. This is what fascism looks and smells like. And fascism becomes possible only when cowardice has already taken root. You're looking at the single biggest coward in the Senate, Thom Tillis of North Carolina. Republican Senator Thom Tillis was the deciding vote when it came to Hegseth's confirmation. All Thom Tillis had to do was vote no, and Hegseth's nomination would have gone down to defeat. We all knew about the $50,000 Hegseth paid that woman to keep quiet about her rape allegations. But there was also Hegseth's sister-in-law from his second marriage. In a sworn affidavit submitted to the Senate Armed Services Committee in January of 2025, Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law alleged that Hegseth's second wife lived in fear of Pete Hegseth throughout their marriage. The second Mrs. Hegseth, according to the sworn affidavit from Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law, the second Mrs. Hegseth had to hide in the closet for fear of getting pummeled by our current defense chief, who insists on being referred to as war chief. Thom Tillis met personally, Senator Thom Tillis met personally with Hegseth's former sister-in-law. He promised if she just signed the sworn affidavit, he would withhold his deciding vote unless she, Hegseth's sister-in-law, was allowed to testify during Hegseth's confirmation hearings. And then the White House began pressuring Thom Tillis. And according to reports, the FBI warned Republican Senator Thom Tillis about threats to his life and his staffers' lives because he was publicly wavering on the Hegseth nomination. Public threats were taking place inside the Oval Office, with newly sworn-in Donald Trump threatening to launch a primary challenge against Thom Tillis, who should be running for re-election right now. He's not. I'll get to that in a second. In March of 2025, Thom Tillis's office released recordings, really disturbing recordings, graphic death threats, callers, Hegseth supporters, Trump supporters threatening to shoot Senator Thom Tillis or attack him with an axe. And it wasn't just Senator Thom Tillis. His staff was told by the FBI, don't come into the office, work remotely. This was for his North Carolina offices. The FBI said, you know what? We have credible threats here. It's not safe for you to come to work. So Thom Tillis's office said that the senator has faced death threats throughout his entire career. And his staff said he got death threats in 2024 because he was in support of divesting TikTok of Chinese ownership. But his staff said never in Thom Tillis's Senate career has he received the volume and severity of death threats during the confirmation hearings of Pete Hegseth. See, this is how fascism takes root, because of cowards like Thom Tillis. With all those death threats, with the FBI telling him he's not safe, with the FBI and local police telling staffers work remotely, Thom Tillis caved and decided to vote for Pete Hegseth. Those death threats were the reason not to vote for Pete Hegseth, you dumb hump. All he had to do, Thom Tillis, was vote no. But he was too chicken shit. He promised Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law, sign this sworn affidavit, and I will withhold my vote until you have an opportunity to testify. So she signed it. She stepped up. She was willing to risk her life. But this coward, this chicken shit coward, Senator Thom Tillis, not only chickened out, he didn't demand that they hear from Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law. He declared, you know what, I've had it. I'm not seeking re-election. And he declared, this is my last year in the Senate. This is how fascism takes root. You need cowards like Thom Tillis. And now this POS, Thom Tillis, is trying to rewrite history, doing interviews. He did one with The Economist I read last week. I almost canceled my subscription to The Economist, which never mentioned his deciding vote on Hegseth. He is trying to portray himself as a modern-day John McCain who goes rogue, a renegade, who's not afraid to go up against Donald Trump. He loves, right now, taking to the well of the Senate and delivering full-throated scolds against members of his own party because he's leaving. He has no ability to block Pete Hegseth, so there are no death threats. So he's writing his next chapter for what? For what? Who knows? I'll have more on Pete Hegseth's testimony momentarily, but I have to warn you, it's worse than Pam Bondi's, because this is exactly what fascism looks like. Bondi smelled like fascism, but it was mostly fascism mixed and sprinkled in with opportunism. This was pure fascism, which is precisely why, in the aftermath of Saturday night's shooting, our nation's top law enforcement officer, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, used that shooting as an opportunity to tell Americans to curb our speech, to warn people who call this administration fascists, to warn people who compare Trump to Hitler that you are creating a climate of fear that leads to people taking arms against our leader. So watch what you say. Unless you're Donald Trump on January 6th, telling his armed goons to march down to the Capitol and fight like hell, or you won't have a country left anymore. Those people get a pardon, or their 20-year seditious conspiracy sentence gets commuted. In a few moments, I'll have more on the testimony given before the House and Senate Armed Services Committee Wednesday and Thursday by our white Christian nationalist defense chief, whose body is covered in neo-Nazi tattoos and whose own mother put into writing he's a serial abuser of women and she's sick of it. His own mother put that into writing. She apologized for putting it into writing during the confirmation hearings, but she never took it back. She said, I never should have put that into writing. You're listening to The Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thanks for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. And if I made a factual error today, let me know. I issue corrections on this show. Please subscribe to this channel and my newsletter. Hit the notification bell so you never miss my latest episode. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. And if you want to join the chat, we're live every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:05 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. I'm keeping this schedule. It's a new schedule, and I'm not deviating, even though I'm a deviant. Also, every night of the week at exactly 8:30 p.m. Eastern, we drop a short clip, a highlight from the live stream. And Saturday night's 8:30 p.m. clip is a watch party. I'll join you in the chat room, and we'll watch a clip from this show together. The Wall Street Journal reporting that our national debt is more than 100% of our gross domestic policy. So what does that mean? Federal government runs budget deficits every year. When you cut taxes for the richest 1%, but also spend $1 trillion on defense, or $1.5 trillion in 2027, you're going to run a deficit. And to keep the government running, to pay the bills, the United States has to issue bonds that pay interest. That's what debt is. Debt is the bonds that get issued, the savings bonds, the T-bills that gets issued and the government pays interest. 10% of our annual budget goes just towards paying the interest on these bonds. The bonds are our debt. People buy our bonds, our debt. The Saudis, the Chinese buy our debt. The richest 1% buy these bonds. And that gives the federal government working cash to pay its yearly budget. But again, bonds, T-bills, are debt. We are borrowing that money to make up for the fact that the government spends more each year than it takes in. Our national debt right now is $39 trillion. In about 2 weeks, it's going to be $40 trillion. That means throughout the history of our nation, 250 years, we've run a budget deficit practically, at least, I mean, under Clinton, there were a couple of years we didn't have a budget deficit, but we've run budget deficits and we've had to issue bonds to cover the deficits. And it's come to a total of $39 trillion, close to $40 trillion, which means we've had to issue $40 trillion of bonds or debt because primarily of Donald Trump and George W. Bush cutting taxes for the wealthy. When you add the debt accumulated during Donald Trump's first term and his second, little more than a year into a second term, he's already responsible for more than 1/3 of our entire debt. He's the king of debt. And that debt in a few more days will be $40 trillion. $40 trillion. Why? Because Trump and George W. Bush and Reagan lower taxes for the rich. Now, GDP, that stands for gross domestic product. And that is what our entire economy, the gross domestic product, is what our entire economy produces in finished goods and services, right? So that's manufacturing and your douchebag accountant who charges you way too much. That's what the GDP stands for. All the goods and services produced within our borders. I have a good accountant, by the way. Now I love my accountant. I've had some bad ones. So that's GDP, gross domestic product. Then there's gross national product, and that's what the entire American economy produces in terms of goods and services, not just here in America, but worldwide. So we have Microsoft and Apple and accounting firms and law firms that have international business. That's the gross national product. And we do better on the gross national product than we do on the gross domestic product. But the gross domestic product, the goods and services manufactured inside our borders, that's what we use to measure our economy. That is the yardstick. The GDP is what we've agreed to be the yardstick for measuring how we're doing. They never asked me, do you like this yardstick? I would have said no. So, what was our GDP for 2025? $31 trillion. Okay, that means our economy within the borders produced $31 trillion worth of goods and services. In 2025, it was $31 trillion. So we're in 2026. If 2026 starts coming in above $31 trillion, that's considered good news. They call it growth. But if it drops below $31 trillion, then it's a recession. We need 2 quarters of the GDP going down, being worth less than $31 trillion. So if it goes down to $30 trillion this last quarter, and then goes down to 29 trillion the second quarter, we're in a recession. And if it drops way below $31 trillion, that's a depression. In other words, the reason our planet has reached the tipping point and we're all going to die from climate catastrophe, the reason this is happening is it's not good enough for our economy to produce $31 trillion worth of goods and services. You've got to produce, at the very least, 2% more each year. We have to keep growing. Otherwise, we're in a recession or a depression. And because this is the United States of America, it's more important for the economy to keep growing, even if it literally kills us. And it is. So our economy, $31 trillion last year, and our debt right now is going to be $40 trillion. So what does that mean? We have a $31 trillion a year economy, and our government's debt is $40 trillion. That means the United States government's debt is larger than the entire economy. And they call that the debt to GDP ratio. It's how much debt does the government have compared to the gross domestic product, or the economy. Under Trump, this year, we haven't seen this kind of debt to GDP ratio since World War II. And that makes sense because we're living during World War Trump. Trump, by the way, wants World War Trump. So he's getting exactly what he wants, a world war. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that a barrel of crude oil right now is selling close to $120. It's touching the highest price since Trump's war began on February 28th. Traders are beginning to realize Trump has no idea or desire to end this war, and there's no way the price of oil is going to come down if the United States is blockading the Strait of Hormuz, which Pete Hegseth calls one of the greatest military maneuvers in history. Huh? He testified yesterday and today that rising prices, well, that's the cost Americans must pay to guarantee Iran never has a nuclear weapon. Well, they don't have nuclear weapons. Your own Director of National Intelligence told you that. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. Tulsi Gabbard testified under oath that they haven't had a nuclear weapons program since 2003. They gave up their nuclear weapons program in 2003. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. And we don't have oil, fertilizer, or natural gas because Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump won't open Hormuz. Why? Well, Hegseth wants to kill Muslims. It's on his biceps. Look at that. You see the Deus Vult tattoo? God's will. That's what it means in Latin, Deus Vult. It's a neo-Nazi tattoo invoking the words of the Crusaders as they marched through the Holy Land, slaughtering Muslims. He wants to kill Muslims. The Hill reporting new data shows inflation in March jumped to 3.5% as the closing of the Strait of Hormuz is forcing up the price, not just of oil, but fertilizer and all goods and services, including food, which already Americans can't afford. By June, we're going to start seeing mass starvation because of this. They estimate 30 million people will face famine in the sub-Saharan and Asia because Hormuz remains closed indefinitely. But hey, it's a small price to pay for Iran not developing a nuclear weapons program that they stopped 23 years ago. It's worth it. The New York Times reporting that the new numbers are in. And the U.S. economy grew 2% during the first quarter of 2026. We're now into May. The first quarter is what? January, February, and March. And we're getting the reports on the first quarter. And the economy grew 2%. So what was I talking about? We have a $31 trillion annual economy, at least according to last year, but now on a quarterly basis, it grew 2%, and that's considered pretty good. That's considered pretty good by people who don't give a rat's ass about humanity or the planet. The economy grew. It grew. Now, economists will say it grew despite high energy prices. Economists say they will say it grew 2% despite inflation. They say that because they think we're stupid. So they don't tell the truth. The truth is the economy grew 2% during the first quarter of the year because of inflation, because of high energy prices. The GDP doesn't measure inflation, unemployment, or human suffering. As Bobby Kennedy said, the good Bobby, not the Bobby Kennedy whose brain was devastated by an earworm, Bobby Kennedy, the father, he famously said, the GDP measures everything in life except what makes life worth living. So, economists are painting a rosy picture right now. Economy grew 2%. They say despite the war in Iran, despite high energy prices. The fact is the economy grew 2% because of the war in Iran, because of high energy prices. See, they just look at the big bucket. They see $31 trillion. They don't care where it comes from. 31 trillion, all in. All the domestically produced goods and services. It doesn't matter that people can't afford health insurance because it's too expensive. United Healthcare making a fortune. That gets factored into the $31 trillion. The bucket is growing because healthcare is so expensive. Doesn't matter, gasoline prices are unaffordable for you and me. Exxon's booking record profits. That gets thrown into the $31 trillion bucket. You see how we measure our economy? See how we measure growth? It's why the stock market keeps hitting record highs. Now, I don't know. I didn't look at the stock market today. I could check it, leave a comment. I don't know. Did it plummet today? I don't follow it that closely. I do know it's hitting record highs. Why is it hitting record highs? Because record profits. Record profits. The yardsticks we use to measure success and failure only benefit the richest 1%. There's no official yardstick to measure who's miserable. There's no immiseration index. Who's being left out of this incredible economic growth? The reason they don't have yardsticks for that is because if they did, we would discover that 99% of our country doesn't participate in this record growth. So they don't bother to measure that. We're not allowed to know officially how crappy our life is in order for Jeff Bezos to have a $250 million wedding in Venice. Instead, this is what they do to you. We're told right now the economy is on fire, so it must be my fault. I'm forced to choose between rent and food. That's what they do to you. And by they, I mean the richest 1%. And yes, it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy to keep money, to concentrate the wealth concentrate the wealth into a few hands. Yes, it's a conspiracy. Federal Reserve is in on it. Congress is in on it. And you're kind of in on it because, excuse me, you're in on it and I'm in it because today I walked past 5 homeless people and didn't give them all my money. We're all in on it. We're all trying to keep what we have, give a little to charity, but not rack up too much debt. That's the conspiracy. And it's always been the conspiracy since the time of Hammurabi. The Washington Post reporting that because Iran closed Hormuz, and now because Trump also closed Hormuz, the price of filling up your car is now at the same level it reached when Trump's buddy, Vladimir Putin, invaded Ukraine. When Donald Trump returned to office in January of 2025, a gallon of gas was under $3, and it's more than doubled in some parts of our country. But our defense chief, Pete Hegseth, says that's a small price to pay to make certain Iran discontinues a nuclear weapons program that they discontinued 23 years ago. Wow. It's a small price to pay if you're Pete Hegseth. But the rest of us didn't make millions telling lies on Fox and Friends, Pete Hegseth. We don't have your money. We don't have 75 grand in cash lying around like you did to pay a woman to keep quiet after she accused you of rape. All of this is because Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, well, Pete Hegseth wants to kill Muslims in Iran, and Trump just wants to kill people and consolidate power. Now, they also happen to be stupid. And because they're stupid and arrogant, you can't be arrogant unless you're stupid, they had no idea who they were going up against, and that would be the Iranians. They are clearly being humiliated by Iran, not just strategically, but tactically. I mean, Hormuz is a strategic humiliation. Tactically, I don't know if you've seen the Lego slop that's getting passed around on social media. They are saying things about Donald Trump that I saw some of these videos. I went, hey, that's my president. It was so bad. That's my president. And then I remembered, okay, so they're being humiliated. Trump is being humiliated by Donald Trump. By blockading the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump is literally doing Iran's work for them. He might as well be dropping bombs on Middle America. Iran only has one weapon against us, choking off the Strait of Hormuz. But for some reason, Trump and Hegseth, in order not to be humiliated, to look smarter than they actually are, to act like they're in charge, they've announced Iran doesn't close Hormuz. We do. Everyone else is saying this is stupid and insane. And by the way, we're all going to die, D-bag, if you don't open up Hormuz. Everybody is saying Trump and Hegseth have been humiliated by Iran. The German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, said so on Monday in front of German schoolchildren. He said Iran has humiliated Trump, and that infuriated Trump. He's like, you can't call somebody on their BS. And the conservative chancellor of Germany, Fred Merz, told the truth. Trump is being humiliated. He's lost this war. And that infuriated Trump, who decided to tell reporters that Merz and broken Germany need to keep their nose out of this war. Really, because every other day you're blaming Germany for not sticking its nose into the war, but now you want Germany, at least on Wednesday, to keep its nose out of your war. You might remember Trump is furious that NATO and Germany are refusing to come help him open Hormuz. So he has no choice but to close it himself. And then he blames Germany because they wouldn't help him reopen Hormuz. He blames NATO for not helping him open Hormuz after everyone warned him, don't bomb Iran, they're going to close Hormuz. So he's still demanding Germany and Great Britain come help. And he lies and says, hey, you guys need the oil from Hormuz more than America does. He's saying, you guys have more of a vest. That's not true, by the way. He says, you have more interests in the oil that comes through Hormuz than we do. But now Fred Merz has to keep his nose out of the war because he said Iran is humiliating Donald Trump. We are the largest producer of liquid natural gas. Well, Donald Trump's seat cushion is the largest producer of liquid natural gas. We are the Permian Basin. We could end up being the largest exporter of oil, but Barack Obama signed a law in 2015 reversing 40 years of energy policy, allowing the oil companies to sell crude oil to the international market. Because if they only have to sell to America, they won't make money or as much money as they want. So they lobbied Obama, and he signed a law in 2015, in December 2015, which lifted the regulation forbidding domestic producers of crude oil. They were forbidden from selling it on the world market. Obama reversed that. You can sell it on the world market, meaning what? The price of oil goes up and down with the demand of the world, not the United States. If you look at our Permian Basin, you look at fracking, you look at how much oil we have versus how much demand, if the oil companies could only sell the oil to the United States, we'd be paying what they pay in Venezuela for oil. So the oil companies said, we got a problem. We can't gouge consumers. Let us sell overseas so the price of oil is pegged to the international market. So we need that oil in Hormuz because it's all in one big bucket. It's all priced the same. So yesterday, Trump was enraged by Fred Merz, who claimed Trump had been humiliated by Iran. So Trump was upset. He's not upset that the sub-Saharan is about to starve or Asia is about to starve or that in California it's about $7 for a gallon of gas. Trump not upset about that. Fred Merz said Iran humiliated Trump. So Trump announced, since Germany thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, no, they don't. That's why they signed the treaty in 2015, Obama's treaty with Iran in 2015. But Trump says, since Germany thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, I'm thinking about removing the 35,000 American troops stationed in Germany. Really? Because the leader of Germany insulted me. So I'm removing all our troops stationed in Germany. But Russian collusion is a hoax. Donald Trump not only wants to pull out of NATO, but he wants to pull the 35,000 American troops out of Germany. And we're supposed to believe Russian collusion is a hoax, that Putin didn't conspire with the Trump campaign in 2016 to throw the election in Donald Trump's favor. No, it's a hoax. It's all a hoax. I blame the American people for being so stupid. You know, after World War II, we decided there's no such thing as collective guilt. When we held the Nuremberg trials, we limited the guilt to the people giving out the orders, not the people following the orders. And we claim we don't believe in collective guilt, but we have no problem dropping 13,000 bombs on the Iranian people, destroying close to 120,000 civilian buildings. We say no collective guilt. We just blame the leaders. A lot of collateral damage for a country that doesn't believe in collective guilt. So we're responsible for Donald Trump. And new polling shows Trump fatigue has set in, that Americans are bored and exhausted by Donald Trump, so they're not paying attention. This is how you end up with Donald Trump. This is how you end up with fascism. This is what a merchant of chaos tries to do. He exhausts everyone. So they go, I can't keep track. I'm not going to follow it anymore. Things will work out. No. He's a merchant of chaos. Not on this show. I get up every morning. I have charts. I have diagrams. Adderall. I'm keeping track of everything. This is an editorial in today's New York Times, and it's devastating. Editorials, by the way, because we have people who lack both critical thinking and internet literacy. So an editorial reflects the well-considered opinion of a newspaper. Editorial is the official stance of a newspaper. These are not opinion pieces written by columnists for that newspaper or contributors. An editorial is the official position of that newspaper. For example, if Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton writes an opinion piece back in 2020 calling for Donald Trump to send troops into cities to break up the Black Lives Matter protests, that is not the official policy of the New York Times. They are just publishing an opinion from the fascist, authoritarian Arkansas Senator, Republican Tom Cotton. But because some Americans are so stupid, especially some on the left, I hear them say, the New York Times wants Trump to send in troops to break up the Black Lives. No. They were giving Tom Cotton enough rope to hang himself, just enough rope to heighten his orgasms. But people don't know the difference between opinion pieces and editorials. It wasn't an editorial. Anyway, this is an editorial from today's New York Times. Devastating, okay? From today's editorial in the New York Times entitled, "The U.S. military was losing its edge after Iran. Everyone knows it." This is the headline. "The U.S. military was losing its edge after Iran. Everyone knows it." I have never, ever read an editorial in the New York Times or anywhere from mainstream media that sounds like something I've been saying for the past year. So here's the New York Times. By the way, most of the stuff you read in the New York Times, you hear on this show first, because I have no filters. So I come to conclusions that everybody at the New York Times comes to, but they have to run it by the filtration system. So by the time it gets into the New York Times, I've already said it. So, this is from today's New York Times. Quote, on paper, the war in Iran should not be much of a contest. The United States spends around $1 trillion a year on its military, more than 100 times as much as Iran. You know where you heard that first. They go on to write, that money buys a vastly larger Air Force and Navy, as well as advanced weapons and technologies that Iranian generals could only dream about. They go on to say, now, however, the contest looks less one-sided. Iran has taken control of the Strait of Hormuz, and its missiles and drones still threaten America's allies in the region. They go on to write, while President Trump seems eager for a negotiated truce, Iran's leaders do not. Let me repeat. While President Trump seems eager for a negotiated truce, Iran's leaders do not. The Times goes on to write, somehow the weaker nation is in the stronger negotiating position. America, more from the New York Times, America has spent hundreds of billions of dollars. This is like something, this is my show for the past 5 years. But it's today's editorial in the New York Times, and I've never seen anything like this in the New York Times before. This is the official statement from the New York Times. Quote, America has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on ships and planes that are good at defeating competitors' ships and planes, but ineffective against cheaper, mass-produced weapons. The American economy does not have the industrial capacity to produce enough of the weapons and equipment it does need. And the country has struggled to fix these problems because of a sclerotic government and a consolidated defense industry that resists change, unquote. New York Times. This is, I've never seen mainstream media tell this kind of truth from the official perch of their editorial board. Now, they've reported this stuff. You know, as Noam Chomsky said, you can find real headlines in the New York Times, but they're just buried. Noam Chomsky famously said, you know, you just have to dig deep into the New York Times and you'll find the real story. They don't lead with the abyss. We're looking into the abyss right now. They are now leading with the abyss. More on Pete Hegseth's testimony before the Senate and the House momentarily. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. We go live every Sunday night, Tuesday night, and Thursday night at 6:05 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. It's also an audio podcast, commercial-free audio podcast. You can hear it wherever you get your audio. If I made any mistakes today, I'm a one-man band. I have Bob and Mila keeping the chat room hygienic, but I check my own facts and then my listeners correct me. So leave a comment if I'm making any mistakes, and I will issue a correction. Donald Trump will now have to go before the Supreme Court in order to appeal the $83.3 million judgment against him in the E. Jean Carroll defamation lawsuit. A lower court ruled he has to pay her, and it doesn't matter that he first defamed E. Jean Carroll while he was president during his first term. The Supreme Court, here's why. This is what the lower court ruled this week. The Supreme Court ruled in Fitzgerald versus Nixon that former or sitting presidents can be sued in civil court for damages inflicted that don't fall under the color of official acts as president. Telling the American people I didn't rape E. Jean Carroll because she's not my type, apparently that's not a role enumerated in Article 2 of the Constitution. I thought it was. But turns out trashing women who accuse you of rape has nothing to do with serving as our nation's commander-in-chief. So that's why the lower court, the last court before the Supreme Court, said, no, you got to pay her $83.3 million. Well, Trump was infuriated by this ruling that came down this week. Now he's got to go before the Supreme Court and claim he has presidential immunity in a civil lawsuit where he has to hand over $83.3 million because he partly, while he was president, said, the woman accusing me of rape is not my type. And that's an official act as president. Well, a spokesperson for Donald Trump responded to Wednesday's lower court ruling by stating, quote, the American people stand with President Trump in demanding an immediate end to the unlawful, radical weaponization of our justice system. E. Jean Carroll sues Donald Trump for sexual assault and defamation, and somehow that is the unlawful, radical weaponization of our justice system. So I didn't know E. Jean Carroll was part of the Biden Justice Department before Biden became president, that she joined the Biden Justice Department while Trump was president during his first term when he defamed her in, I believe, 2019. So she jumped into a time machine and joined the Biden Justice Department. It's a civil lawsuit, but it's weaponization of our justice system, which Donald Trump, he will not put up with this. He's very worried about the weaponization of America's justice system. In fact, he thinks Jim Comey, a Republican and former FBI chief, he thinks Jim Comey weaponized the Justice Department by looking into Russiagate back in 2016. He thinks Robert Mueller, a Republican, weaponized the Justice Department when Mueller concluded that Putin did in fact interfere with the 2016 election in order to help Donald Trump win it. Trump thinks the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee, at the time chaired by Marco Rubio, he thinks Marco Rubio weaponized the Justice Department when the Senate Intelligence Committee, during the first Trump presidency, issued a report that Putin tried to interfere in the 2016 presidential election on Donald Trump's behalf. Trump thinks his Republican Attorney General Bill Barr and special counsel John Durham, a Republican appointed by Trump's Republican Attorney General Bill Barr, Trump thinks Republican John Durham weaponized the Justice Department after he concluded from a 4-year investigation looking into the origins of the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane probe. Crossfire Hurricane is the name of the FBI probe that began in 2016 after Comey and John Brennan from the CIA concluded that Putin was interfering with the presidential election on behalf of Donald Trump, and they looked into it and they called it Crossfire Hurricane. Donald Trump believes that was the weaponization of our government against him, and he thinks John Durham, the Republican appointed by Bill Barr to look into whether or not the Justice Department had been weaponized against Donald Trump. He thinks Durham, a Republican, weaponized the Justice Department when he concluded that the Justice Department was not weaponized against Donald Trump after its 4-year investigation concluding that there was Russian interference and the FBI wasn't hallucinating. He thinks they were all in on this grand conspiracy to come up with Russian interference in the 2016 presidential elections. The grand conspiracy. It's a real thing, and I'm going to get to that in a second. In other words, they are prosecuting people in Miami using the DOJ. They are prosecuting, quote unquote, the grand conspiracy, and they're coming after Comey, and they're coming after John Brennan, but of course it's failing. But it doesn't matter. It's the process that's the punishment. They don't care about convictions. They care about the nuisance of forcing Brennan and Comey to hire lawyers and just be anxious all the time, the way Trump was during his 4 years in the wilderness when Biden was president. So Trump hates the weaponization of our Justice Department. He hates it so much that he ordered Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, now I hope, what is Todd Blanche about to do? Oh, he's begging. I thought he was about to do something else for Donald Trump. He's just begging. He's on his knees, begging. I thought he was about to do something else. That is 100% Photoshop. That is an actual, authentic, it's verifiably Photoshop. Trump is so opposed to the weaponization of our Justice Department, he ordered Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to indict former FBI Chief James Comey for threatening to kill the President of the United States. That's right. Former FBI Director James Comey was indicted on Tuesday, charged with 2 counts of threatening the life of our president. And yesterday, he was placed under arrest after turning himself over to federal law enforcement inside a Virginia courtroom where he was arraigned during a hearing that lasted fewer than 10 minutes. Comey entered no plea, but in an earlier Substack post said he was innocent, and his lawyers say they plan to file a motion accusing Donald Trump's Justice Department of vindictive prosecution. Great, so they're going to tie up our courts with some bogus lawsuit accusing Donald Trump of vindictive prosecution. Comey is charged with threatening the life of Donald Trump when he took to social media in May of last year and posted this picture of seashells on the beach arranged in such a way to spell out the numbers 8647. 47 denoting Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States. 86, a term used by bartenders when they want to stop serving someone and or toss them out of the establishment for being too drunk. But the Justice Department argues 86 has come to signify something far more sinister than removing a customer from a bar. So, while the White House, the Justice Department, and several Republicans insist this image you're looking at was a death threat, the only words Comey added to this Instagram post was, quote, cool shell formation on my beach walk, 8647. I mean, wasn't the Norman invasion also 8647? I'm not good at history, but I'm pretty certain 8647 is when William the Conqueror invaded England. Or maybe 8647 is when the Magna Carta was signed in 8647. Could mean a lot of things. No, it means, according to the Trump Justice Department, it's a death threat. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, alongside FBI Director Kash Patel, announced the indictment late Tuesday. Despite Comey being an FBI chief with no prior arrests except for Trump's other indictment last year that failed, despite Comey being a Boy Scout, Patel and Blanche said, it's important that we show the world that in America, nobody is above, or in this case, below the law. Taking questions from the press after announcing Comey's indictment, Blanche refused to address the First Amendment factors at play here, whether posting pictures of seashells is protected speech. This is now the second time Trump's Justice Department has indicted Comey in the past year. By the way, they also fired his daughter, Maureen Comey, who was a top prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. She helped prosecute Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Gee, I wonder why Todd Blanche, Pam Bondi, and Email Bove would have fired her. Comey was indicted last year, charged with lying before Congress in 2020 when he denied under oath that he ever authorized anyone in the FBI to leak information to the press. That case was thrown out. There was an illegitimate prosecutor, and there's a statute of limitations, so that's gone. This new indictment, this is the only thing they could get on Comey. It is part of Trump's directive. The reason Comey was indicted on Tuesday is Trump has ordered the Justice Department to be weaponized to get even with anyone who weaponized the Justice Department against him. A little different. There's a tiny little difference here. Trump is guilty. Trump is guilty. Comey's a Boy Scout. Now, I know we all hate Comey because of the email announcement. He's reopening the investigation of Hillary. I know. But that was against protocol, not against the law. So I'm going to talk about the grand conspiracy, and I'm going to get to Hegseth's testimony. I'm going to talk about this grand conspiracy. We have a president who is a paranoid schizophrenic with delusions of grandeur, and he is forcing the Justice Department to prosecute the grand conspiracy against him. It's a real thing. The Comey indictment is part of a larger investigation being led by our Justice Department to look into what they call the grand conspiracy against Donald Trump. This is why we have medication and psychiatrists. Instead, down in Miami, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, this would be a federal prosecutor named Jason Redding Quinones. He is leading that Justice Department office down there. They have convened a grand jury, and they're calling witnesses to come testify about the grand conspiracy against Donald Trump. And they plan on calling James Comey, and they issued a subpoena for former CIA Director John Brennan to come testify about the grand conspiracy, which Trump insists began during the final year of the Obama administration. The grand conspiracy. According to Southern District of Florida prosecutor, U.S. Attorney Jason Redding Quinones, the grand conspiracy, your tax dollars, by the way, the grand conspiracy was the deep dark state using the CIA and the FBI to destroy Donald Trump's candidacy and then, after he got elected, his presidency. Again, the Justice Department, under Pam Bondi, appointed this prosecutor, Jason Redding Quinones, and he is spending his salary, his time, we're paying him to get to the bottom of the grand conspiracy. That's him, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Jason Redding Quinones. He is the prosecutor working to prove the grand conspiracy. resulted in phony charges of Russian interference. Not only that, the phony charges of Donald Trump mishandling classified documents, the phony charges against Trump accusing him of attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, which, according to the grand conspiracy, was stolen from Trump by the deep, dark state which put Joe Biden into office. It is the grand conspiracy. They've put it all together for us, and they're going to prosecute this down in the Southern District of Florida, your federal government at work. Now, why is it in the Southern District of Florida? Why do you think? Well, why wouldn't it be Washington, D.C.? Because the Justice Department went venue shopping, and they picked Miami so they could have Justice Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee. She would oversee the grand jury. Remember Justice Eileen Cannon? Cannon, you might remember, threw out Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified documents, violating the Espionage Act. We all heard the tapes. This was a slam dunk. They said, of all the indictments against Donald Trump, this was the easiest one to prove. Everyone knew this was going to be the easiest one to prosecute. So Jack Smith, because he is fair, he decided to venue shop in favor of Donald Trump. He decided, you know what, I'm prosecuting Trump in Washington, D.C. for attempting to overthrow the government of the United States on January 6th. I'm going to give him a break. This is a slam dunk. This requires no thinking. I'm going to venue shop on behalf of the president, or ex-president Donald Trump, and I'm going to file these charges down in Miami, in the district where he lives at Mar-a-Lago, so that he can have a more favorable venue, find a jury pool that might be a little more sympathetic to Donald Trump's violation of the Espionage Act. And he ended up having Judge Eileen Cannon as the judge in the classified documents case, and she threw it out. She's a Trump appointee. She's ignorant, ill-equipped for the job. Well, she's a Trump appointee. And so Eileen Cannon threw out the classified documents case, claiming Jack Smith was illegitimate because he was a federal prosecutor who had not been confirmed by Congress. There was no precedent for this ruling other than Judge Clarence Thomas opining in 2024, exactly almost 2 years ago. Remember the immunity ruling where the Roberts Court said, we're going to send these indictments against Trump back to the lower court, and we have to parse out which of these crimes is an official act and an unofficial act. And Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion where he wondered whether or not Jack Smith was legitimately a prosecutor for the Department of Justice, since he was never confirmed by the Senate. And Eileen Cannon said, I'm going to go with that. And she threw the case out. And Jack Smith was in the process of appealing this. But then the American people decided to elect Donald Trump again. Eventually, there's collective guilt here. Eventually, you got to stop blaming the system and Jack Smith and the courts and start blaming the American people for supporting Donald Trump, for voting for him. And don't tell me it was fixed. I know about voter suppression. I also get plenty of information from polls on what people truly believe about Donald Trump. There are fascistic strains inside the United States. So it's very convenient, especially this new Voter Rights Act ruling from the Supreme Court, to start blaming the Supreme Court. I don't have time to get into that today, but the Supreme Court's ruling about immunity, they didn't protect Donald Trump the way everybody wants you to think. There were superseding indictments handed down by Jack Smith about a month before the November election of 2024. And if you read those superseding indictments, Donald Trump would have been found guilty, because what he did on January 6th and the lead up to January 6th was electioneering. It had nothing to do with being president of the United States. So, because he got reelected, Trump was able to, Jack Smith just quit. He knew he was going to get fired, so he just quit. Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, was subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury convened in Miami to look into the grand conspiracy. Trump and Jim Jordan is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, they accused John Brennan, he was Obama's CIA director, of lying under oath about his use of the Steele dossier as the basis for launching Crossfire Hurricane. Now, it shouldn't surprise you, this investigation into the grand conspiracy is falling apart. Doesn't matter. It will continue. Doesn't matter. The same way the Hunter Biden investigation continued. The process is the punishment, not the outcome. The lead prosecutor in the grand, they have separate prosecutors as part of the grand conspiracy investigation. Your tax dollars at work. So there was a lead prosecutor underneath Quinones who was looking into Brennan's role in the grand conspiracy. And she was removed after she accidentally told the Trump Justice Department, there's nothing here. You don't say that. So they brought in Joseph DeGenova. Some of you who watch Fox News know who he is, and he's reportedly leading the investigation into former CIA Director John Brennan. But the subpoenas last week were withdrawn. And now witnesses are being asked to show up before the grand jury voluntarily. Of course, it's going to fall apart, but it's like an audit. If you've ever been audited, they clear, you did pay your taxes, but it costs you a lot of money to get audited. Pam Bondi was forced to step aside as Attorney General, partly because she was not pursuing Trump's perceived enemies with the vigor and enthusiasm Trump demanded. He wanted her to prosecute the grand conspiracy. And he was also reportedly disappointed by Bondi's failure to protect him in the controversy over the release of the Epstein files. But there's no pleasing this monster because she did everything she could for him. I mean, the last time Bondi testified before Congress, she perjured herself on behalf of Donald Trump. She lied under oath and said there was no evidence inside the Epstein files implicating Donald Trump. That's just a lie. There's no proof that he committed any crimes in the Epstein files, but there's evidence. She perjured herself. But Bondi will get yet another opportunity to perjure herself. May 29th, she's going to testify before the House committee investigating the Epstein files. So she gets another opportunity to lie. Won't be under oath, though. It's the House Oversight Committee chaired by Kentucky Republican Jim Comer. No relation to Jim Comey. It's like he's the antithesis. Jim Comer is the antithesis of Jim Comey. So Bondi will testify, but not before the full committee. She'll be deposed, and she will not be sworn in, but she could still face criminal prosecution if she lies. Okay, I'm going to get to the Hegseth testimony. Comey, as I said, is a subject of the grand conspiracy investigation, such as it is. I mean, it's falling apart, but it's the process. The process is the punishment. It's like an audit. And by the way, Comey got the mother of all audits from the IRS a year after Trump fired him from the FBI. And McCabe, the guy who replaced Comey at the FBI, also got the mother of all audits the same year. They call it a living autopsy. The IRS has the power to conduct what they call a living autopsy, and you have to bring in lawyers, and they pore over everything. It's the mother of all audits. A handful of people get it every year. And for some reason, Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe, the guy who replaced him at the FBI, after they both left the FBI, they both got the mother of all audits from Donald Trump. Amazing. Comey is been indicted for posting this on Instagram, a photograph of seashells. He saw seashells at the seashell, so he took a picture. I'd like to see Nancy Pelosi say that. He saw seashells at the seashore, so he took a picture. I don't like Nancy Pelosi. So what was I talking about? So he posted on Instagram a photograph of seashells. He spotted at the beach. He saw some seashells. I saw the beach. And they arranged to say 8647, right? 47th president of the United States, 86, meaning to throw someone out of a bar for unruly behavior. No, says Trump. 86 has a much more sinister meaning. Trump told reporters yesterday, 86 is, quote, a mob term for killing. I watch every documentary, every movie. I've read every book I can about the mob. They don't use the term 86. Trump said, no, the mob uses that term 86 to say when they want to kill them. He further explained the slang. He said, they, the mob, say 86, the son of a gun. That's what the mafia says. They say 86, the son of a gun. Yeah, that's how the mafia talks. 86, the son of a gun. And then once again, he called Comey a dirty cop. Now that's a mafia term. That's what the mafia says. Mobsters call people who work for the FBI dirty cops. That's what they will often say, in fact, to justify killing a cop. Watch Godfather 1. Before Michael kills Sterling Hayden in Godfather 1, he tells Sonny, nobody will care. He's a dirty cop. Trump was asked if Comey's pictures of seashells, Trump was asked if Comey's pictures of seashells put him, Donald Trump, in danger. And Trump said, probably. Yes, so we must indict Comey. He then accused Comey of contributing to a climate that sparks political violence. Watch what you say, and watch how you arrange seashells. Yes, we have a First Amendment, but that doesn't give you the right to arrange seashells that spell out fire in a crowded movie theater. Bloomberg reporting that the suspect in Saturday night's shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, charged with attempting to kill the president, will be facing even more charges. But Jeanine Pirro, the D.C. prosecutor, says it's too early to say what these new charges are. She said they're still waiting for the ballistic tests to come back. This is really interesting. Reuters is reporting that so far, the legal filings from the Justice Department do not accuse the suspect of firing that shot which sent a Secret Service agent to the hospital Saturday night. Thankfully, that Secret Service agent who took the bullet, thankfully he was wearing a vest. He was released later that night. And everyone assumed he was shot by the suspect. Todd Blanche, acting Attorney General, said, "We're pretty sure he was shot by the suspect, but we're waiting for the ballistic tests to come back." And Reuters is reporting that so far, the suspect has not been charged with firing a shot at the Secret Service agent, Kash Patel. This is an actual Photoshop with some AI. This is real. This is real Photoshop and real AI of Kash Patel, hard at work, surrounded by, I don't know what that is. Is that vomit? Yeah. Kash Patel says he's pouring through the ballistics reports to determine who shot the Secret Service agent. So it raises a very serious problem for the Republican Party and, of course, the gun lobby. What if the suspect didn't shoot the Secret Service agent? What if instead that Secret Service agent was hit by friendly fire, accidentally hit by friendly fire? It blows holes in the good guy with a gun narrative that justifies putting as many guns as possible into the hands of ordinary Americans. If you're a Republican, if you're a gun lobbyist, you're doing everything you can to make sure that ballistic report comes back and says, oh yeah, the suspect shot the Secret Service agent. Because what would it say if the Secret Service agent, a good guy with a gun, was accidentally shot by another good guy with a gun? What would that say? Very, very difficult if you're a gun lobbyist. We know when confronted by incidents like Saturday night, even the world's best sharpshooters don't always know where to aim. This was being shown as an example of why we don't need gun laws. We need more good guys with guns. Well, if this ballistics report comes back and says a good guy with a gun accidentally discharged his weapon into another good guy with a gun, that should tell you everything you need to know about why we need more gun laws in this country. Meanwhile, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is desperately trying to get nominated to serve as full-time Attorney General. Is that him? I saw this picture before. Is that him begging Donald Trump or about to do something? He's on his knees. It looks like he's either praying, begging, or about to do something prison style for Donald Trump. He desperately wants to become the real Attorney General. He hates being an acting Attorney General. Well, you're always acting as an attorney, Todd Blanche. You're a crappy attorney. You're just acting like one. Donald Trump is a convicted felon because of your lawyering, Todd Blanche. So you've always been acting as an attorney. So he will do anything. He indicted Comey, whatever you want, mein Führer, whatever you want. He indicted Comey. After the shooting, that night, Todd Blanche, our acting Attorney General, immediately blamed members of the press for the assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Who, and many people in this room, if we're going to be honest about it, has done it as well. They're just as guilty as a lot of people on X. When you have reporters, when you have media just being overly critical and calling the president horrible names for no reason and without evidence, without proof, it shouldn't surprise us that this type of rhetoric takes place.
Yeah, I went over this on the last show. This type of rhetoric it's a Freudian slip. He meant to say this kind of violence takes place, but what slipped out was this kind of rhetoric takes place, because deep down he knows when you have a fascist for a president, it shouldn't surprise you that this type of rhetoric takes place, because people like to call things what they are. But instead, he's saying, when you call Trump a fascist, you're creating a climate that encourages gun violence. So blame the shooting on the media, on the First Amendment, instead of easy access to guns. Yep, guns had nothing to do with it, which is why just 2 days after the shooting, Todd Blanche announced that President Trump, who in fewer than 2 years, Donald Trump has been the target of 3 assassination attempts. President Trump, who almost died in Butler, Pennsylvania, Todd Blanche announced that Donald Trump reversed several Biden-era gun regulations, specifically a regulation that Biden implemented to close what is called the gun show loophole. This is incredible. Just days after the 3rd attempt on Donald Trump's life with a gun, in fewer than 2 years, he got rid of the gun show loophole. So, according to federal law, before buying a weapon, a customer must go through a background check. That's according to the Gun Control Act of 1968, which was passed after Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King were assassinated. So they passed a law. And by the way, since 1968, something like 1 million Americans have died from gun violence. They say since 1968, more Americans have died from guns than all soldiers injured in combat combined. But according to the Gun Control Act of 1968, if you're a licensed gun dealer, you're not allowed to sell a gun to a convicted felon. You know, like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. He's not allowed to buy a gun unless he went to a gun show or bought his gun from an unlicensed dealer. Then he wouldn't have to go through a background check. But Biden closed that loophole. That's called the gun show loophole. Before Biden closed the gun show loophole, like Trump, who was a convicted felon, he was a convicted felon while Biden was president. Trump couldn't buy a gun because he's a convicted felon. And he couldn't go to a gun show or use an unlicensed gun dealer. They do a background check and find out that Donald Trump is a convicted felon and he can't buy a gun because of Biden closing the gun show loophole. So no gun for Trump. But this week, Trump reversed Joe Biden's regulation that got rid of the gun show loophole. And that means Donald Trump, a convicted felon, can go to a gun show or to an unlicensed dealer and buy a gun without anyone performing a background check and then discovering that Donald Trump is a convicted felon and you're not allowed to sell him a gun. He still can't walk into a gun store and purchase a gun. But he can, thanks to this new reversal of the Biden regulation, Trump can now go buy a gun at a gun show or from an unlicensed dealer, and they don't have to do a background check to discover that Donald Trump is a convicted felon. And, as they say, an adjudicated rapist, meaning a civil jury found him guilty of sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll, but because the trial took place in New York State, and New York State differentiates between sexual assault and rape, he was accused of sexual assault. But the judge in the case said, in common law parlance, this is the judge in the E. Jean Carroll trial, twice he put into writing that in common law parlance, a civil jury found Donald Trump liable for rape. And that's all George Stephanopoulos, ABC and Disney had to say instead of giving Donald Trump $20 million. It's all George Stephanopoulos had to say. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. Leave a comment if I'm getting anything wrong. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth testified before the House Armed Services Committee on Wednesday and the Senate Armed Services Committee on Thursday. Hegseth was met by protesters while he was walking into the House hearings. One demonstrator on Wednesday waved hands that were covered in fake blood. Here is accused rapist Pete Hegseth walking into the House Armed Services Committee hearing room alongside his third wife, a devout Christian woman with whom he fathered a child out of wedlock while Hegseth was still married to his second wife.
Secretary Hegseth, why are you blocking Ukraine aid? Why are you stopping $400 million to Ukraine aid?
Why did you order the bombing of the school children? Why did you order the bombing?
Yourself. How many American service members have to die for Israel?
Okay. And by the way, you should give money to Code Pink and Medea Benjamin, a great American. She is out there every day reminding war criminals that they're war criminals. And here is war criminal Pete Hegseth trying to make his opening statement today during Thursday's Senate testimony, but getting interrupted by protesters.
American workers who serve as the industrial muscle behind our warriors.
Further interruptions of our hearing will be treated in like manner. We appreciate the First Amendment rights of Americans to express themselves, but disruption of this hearing will not be tolerated.
Yes, we appreciate the First Amendment rights of all Americans, but again, you cannot arrange seashells in a crowded movie theater and have those seashells say fire in a crowded movie theater. During his testimony on Wednesday, sorry, but the volume was a little low on that, but suffice to say, the protesters pierced Hegseth's bubble of privilege momentarily. During his testimony on Wednesday, Hegseth lashed out at Democrats, accusing them of hating all wars from the get-go and never willing to give wars a chance. Didn't John Lennon and Yoko record that album, Give War a Chance? He said, it's only been 2 months. Give war a chance. And then he said, you Democrats have trashed our soldiers who gave their lives in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. You have trashed our soldiers by criticizing the wars they died in, by calling Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan pointless failures. You're desecrating the graves of the American soldiers who gave their lives. Interesting, because here is the accused rapist, Pete Hegseth, a week ago today, opening his last press briefing. He had a press briefing last week, and here's how he opened that press briefing.
Well, good morning. Unlike the endless wars of the past that dragged on for years and for decades with little to show for it, Operation Epic Fury has delivered a decisive military results in just weeks. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, as the president has pointed out, all took years, decades. Vague missions, shifting sands, little to show for it. Operation Epic Fury has been laser focused from the very start, as I've said to all of you. Clear mission objectives, and ultimately Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. It's a bold and dangerous mission, a gift to the world, historic, courtesy of a bold and historic president.
A gift to the world. How can we write a thank you note to Donald Trump? Thank you, Donald Trump. I can't afford food. I can't afford to fill up my car. We're just send a thank you note for this gift. Thank you so much. This mission has been so clear. He spelled it out precisely, and we know exactly what it's about. It's to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapons program that it gave up in 2003. It's to spread democracy in Iran also, to topple the regime. Yes, it's a clear mission. Yes. And why are we blockading Hormuz again? It's almost as though Pete Hegseth will say anything. And we saw Wednesday and Thursday this week, Pete Hegseth, a pathological liar, will say anything. He learned that, well, he's probably born that way, but he perfected it on Fox News. If Hegseth is called out for lying, incompetence, he takes a page from the George W. Bush playbook and calls it a gotcha question. In fact, he's adopted some of the mannerisms of George W. Bush. He does the whataboutisms. What about Joe Biden? Joe Biden did it. This was all on full display Wednesday and Thursday. It's quite amateurish. It's sophistry. It's when you don't have a defense, you just talk over the person asking you a question. You say, what about the Democrats? Or you're missing the larger picture. And of course, our troops. Why are you trashing our troops? Congressman Adam Smith tried to nail Hegseth down on why exactly we're fighting Iran. Smith said, ask the question all of us have been asking. You claim we obliterated Iran's nuclear weapons program in June of last year. If you obliterated it, why did you have to obliterate it again? I mean, he didn't say it like that, but he's basically saying, I thought we accomplished this. I thought we accomplished in June of last year what we accomplished in 2003, Iran not having a nuclear weapons program. But Hegseth talked over Smith and then accused him of missing the larger point. Okay, what's the larger point? The larger point, Donald Trump is the most proactive and courageous president in American history. And why are you desecrating the memory of our troops? Like Pam Bondi, Hegseth was playing to an audience of one, Donald Trump. I kept waiting for Hegseth to ask why nobody's talking about the stock market's record numbers, like Bondi did. Remember that? Why aren't we talking about the Dow? Because you're not Commerce Secretary, Pam Bondi. You're not Treasury Secretary. We're not here to talk about the economy. We're here to talk about the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. who you are denying due process. Now, Bondi eventually did not survive those hearings for many reasons. Primarily, she's a girl. Trump fired Kristi Noem, Pam Bondi, Lori Chavez-DeRemer. She was the labor secretary. All three women were tossed to the curb and had to do the walk of shame the next day. But Pete Hegseth, he's been accused of rape. So to Donald Trump, he's like a son. I don't see Trump firing Hegseth, but I do think it being midterms and the polling that we're seeing on Pete Hegseth and his war, Republicans in Congress might be quietly telling Trump Hegseth has to go. Remember, Hegseth got confirmed by one vote, Tom Tillis. So Pete Hegseth is a coward who hides behind the flag, his counterfeit religion, his misunderstanding of the Constitution or contempt for the Constitution. He's a coward. He's just a frightened little boy who drinks. He wages war on the media, doesn't want to be asked questions. He has banned the media from the halls of the Pentagon. Reporters are forbidden from talking to any Pentagon official without an escort. I don't know why prostitutes have to be brought in. I don't know why they're hiring escorts at the Pentagon. Oh, it's a different type of escort. Well, here is Pete Hegseth last week calling reporters unpatriotic.
Well, we're always on the lookout for CI threats, any internal threats, anyone talking out of school about things they should not. We take leaking very seriously here, informally or formally, which is why some of the reporting done by some of the people in here is incredibly problematic. They're willing to publish things based on classified information that would potentially harm those in harm's way. And we think them doing so is incredibly irresponsible and unpatriotic. And it would encourage members of the press to think twice about the lives they're affecting when they publish things in their publications like the New York Times.
Think twice about the lives you're affecting, like me, Pete Hegseth, because when you report on my incompetence, you're affecting my life. But he doesn't say that. He just says, it's the troops. You're hurting the troops. But when they report on his incompetence killing our troops, that's unpatriotic, right? That's unpatriotic. Well, Hegseth, and you notice the George W. Bush mannerisms? Hegseth was referring partly to a report by CBS about American soldiers dying at Port, I'm mispronouncing this, Shoaiba. It's a major port in southern Kuwait. It's about 50 miles from Kuwait City. I'm not pronouncing it properly, but on March 1st of this year, it was the day after Trump began bombing Iran, the Iranians launched a one-way suicide drone towards a tactical operations center in the port of Shuaiba, and it killed 6 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers, injuring more than 30. And CBS broke the story that the soldiers were placed on an X too close to the Iranian border, too vulnerable. Their air defense systems failed, and there were no warning sirens that were activated before the impact. And we've talked about this on the show. There were no medics, no ambulances. The injured soldiers had to commandeer civilian automobiles to drive to a hospital. It was a disaster. So he had to answer for this during the House hearings on Wednesday. Congressman Pat Ryan, a Democrat from New York, wanted answers on this drone attack at Port Shuaiba in Kuwait and wanted to know why you sent our troops to what was referred to as an indefensible base. Hegseth accused Congressman Ryan of playing gotcha and monologuing falsehoods, unquote, monologuing falsehoods. One little problem with this. Congressman Pat Ryan, Democrat from New York, 18th Congressional District, is a combat veteran, served with the Army from 2004 to 2009. He was a captain, intelligence officer. He graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and he did 2 combat tours in Iraq. He was deployed to Mosul in 2008 during the height of the insurgency. He has 2 Bronze Star medals, an Army Commendation Medal, Army Achievement Medal, and you can see Pete Hegseth crumbling, withering underneath the questioning of Congressman Pat Ryan. Watch the defense chief turn into a frightened little boy, which he is. Hegseth is a frightened little boy. That's why he has to talk tough. That's why he's an alcoholic, or is allegedly an alcoholic. That's why he has belongs to some bizarre religious cult. He's a frightened little boy. An abusive man. Abusive men are frightened little boys. Here is the withering cross-examination from Congressman Pat Ryan.
Before the war started, there was clear intelligence that Shuaibah was high on Iran's target list. Internal analysis had said the site was indefensible from aerial attack and should not be used. Yet you sent our soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Command there anyway. Is that true or false? True or false? Straightforward question.
Are you going to give me a chance to answer or just play gotcha?
Did you send them there or not?
We took proactive
I'll
measures
take that
from the
as a yes
beginning to
and
ensure
reclaim my
force
time.
protection and defensive
Now,
posture were
let's talk,
maximized
Mr.
across
Secretary,
the theater.
Let's talk about what defenses they had. Prior to the attack, officers on the ground knew our troops were vulnerable. In fact, they requested additional force protection. Did they receive it?
Wherever humanly possible, force protection
not.
and counter
I'll
UAS
save you
was
the
always
time.
made available.
They did not. In fact, when asked to describe the base's defense, one survivor who's come forward from the unit said, quote, I would put it in the none category. From a drone defense capability, none. So let's be clear, no counter-drone capabilities, no counter-rocket systems, no counter-mortar or counter-artillery, not even the basic overhead protection that you and I had 20 years ago in Iraq, and now 6 of our soldiers are dead. The next day, you downplayed the attack. You said it was a squirter that squeaked through fortified defenses. But since then, thankfully, brave survivors have come forward to set the record straight. One of our surviving soldiers told CBS, quote, painting a picture that one squeaked through is a falsehood. Another said the unit was, quote, unprepared to provide any defense for itself. It was not a fortified position. Another survivor said the building's protection was about as weak as one gets. Secretary Hegseth, that is obviously in direct contradiction to what you said from the Pentagon podium the next day. So are you saying that these soldiers, our soldiers who survived this horrific attack, are lying?
What I'm saying is before the commencement of the conflict, we put in maximum defensive posture we could.
That's a direct
We moved
contradiction to
70
what they said.
in this directing. Can I speak, or are you just going to monologue falsehoods all over the place?
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of
Reclaiming
the
my
X based
time.
on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right.
Just because you yell doesn't
I'm
make you right.
reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors.
Just because you yell doesn't mean you're right. How many kids have said that to authority figures? Just because you yell at me doesn't mean you're right. Frightened little man, Pete Hegseth. Now, 3 marriages, accused, I don't know if it's true, but there's something going on with his manhood that he has to, he's a frightened little man is what he is. And he's typical, this is Congressman Pat Ryan, and Hegseth knows he's outmanned here. And watch Hegseth's body language.
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of
Reclaiming
the
my
X based
time.
on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right.
calling?
Just because you yell doesn't
I'm
make you right.
reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors. You just said what they said is a falsehood.
There's a much larger
that
picture.
true?
There's a much larger picture at play here that included integrated air defenses, bunkers, moving people off
Then
the X
why, Mr.
to
Secretary,
ensure
are
that they
they
were
dead?
not part of the target. We moved those troops and all across the theater, thousands of troops off the X, off of their bases, because we knew what Iran was going to try to strike, and we knew there could be a tragic moment.
No
there could be a
answer, Mr.
tragic moment where
Secretary.
something
Again.
could get through. Of
Again.
course, that's the
I'm
consequence of
reclaiming my
conflict,
time.
and we
Again.
remember those 6 every single day.
I wanna finish-
But don't play games with.
I'm not playing games.
raising
I
your
want to
voice
finish
and
with
pointing
one more
fingers.
quote from a survivor of the attack, and I'll put this on the record. Telling the truth is important, and we're not going to learn from these mistakes if we pretend these mistakes didn't happen. Secretary Hegseth, those soldiers told the truth. Those soldiers are braver than you are.
I commend
They
them.
are asking for accountability. They deserve accountability, and I'm asking for the same, starting with you. And as I said a year ago, you need to resign immediately.
I commend those
And I
soldiers.
yield back.
So Hegseth is a fascist and a war criminal. And while that was withering, you cannot humiliate or get through to a fascist war criminal. All you can do is arrest them. He should be arrested. There are laws on the book. The War Crimes Act of 1996 here in the United States. Pete Hegseth is not just a fascist, he's a war criminal, and he should be arrested. Nobody's going to humiliate him. He's wrapped in his own self-assuredness, his own religious purity. He's a fascist, theological fascist, and a war criminal. That's a fact. I'm not calling for him to be hurt physically. I'm calling for our government to enforce laws that are on the books, the War Crimes Act of 1996, and arrest this man. That's all I'm asking. Don't want to see him hurt. Don't want to see his family hurt. Just want him arrested for war crimes. That's all I want. He's also stupid, and he knows he's stupid. That's why he drinks. And he cannot tell us how much the war had cost or will cost, because he had 2 nonprofits before he became Secretary of Defense that he ran into bankruptcy. He was removed from 2 nonprofits that he set up for veterans that, according to reports, he just spent all the money and didn't keep track. And who better to run a $1 trillion a year Pentagon than somebody who spends money like a drunken Pete Hegseth? Not a drunken sailor, a drunken Pete Hegseth. So he says, what, 25 million, 25 billion? He kept giving different answers as to what the war cost. Also claimed, we never asked you for 200 billion. I have that. I'm going to play a clip where he denies that they're asking for a $200 billion war supplemental. Here is Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, and she, I believe, is not a congresswoman from California. I may be wrong here. I think she represents New Hampshire, and she's everything Pete Hegseth despises. And because she's a woman, and she served in the United States Navy Reserve as an intelligence officer, so she's got her bona fides. Here she is asking Pete Hegseth, what does this war cost and how is it affecting Americans? And Pete Hegseth thought he was on Fox and Friends. This is the most childish behavior I've seen since Donald Trump or Pam Bondi.
Mr. Hegseth, can I ask you, do you know what the average cost of a gallon of gas was in this country on February 28th?
Well, it depends on where you live. If you live in California, it's $8.
$2.83. Do you know what the average cost of a gallon of gas is today?
Much higher in California.
$4.23. I gotta say, Mr. Hegseth, you said you've got a crack economic team that's looking at the impacts of this war on the American taxpayer, and you can't answer this basic question. That should shock the conscience of every American.
In California, I don't think she's a congresswoman from California. He was digging into California. Like, gas is more expensive in California because of all the taxes they charge to clean up the air. California, I think she's New Hampshire. So that was just childish and stupid, but that's how he rolls. There were a lot of congresswomen who got under his skin. Representative Sarah Jacobs represents, I believe, San Diego. And she says, because, was it Camp Pendleton? Am I getting that wrong? There's a Marine base. I've actually gone there. I think it's Camp. I apologize. She said, I get a lot of calls from the families of Marines when Donald Trump posts, open that effing Hormuz or we're going to bomb you back to the Stone Ages, that the wives and the husbands and the families of our soldiers think Donald Trump is demented. And she's getting calls like, I don't trust him as my loved one's commander. And Pete Hegseth did the whataboutism. What about Joe Biden? You weren't concerned about Joe Biden's mental capacity. Well, Ro Khanna is a Democrat from Silicon Valley. He's worth several $100 million. He asked about what this war is costing, and Hegseth couldn't give him a straight answer. And then Ro Khanna not only talked about what it's costing taxpayers in terms of money spent on bombs and soldiers, but what it's costing us in terms of paying higher gas and food prices. And Pete Hegseth dismissed the rising costs of food on the home front as, quote unquote, domestic things. Like, why are you bothering me with domestic things? Here is Congressman Ro Khanna.
Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not.
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas.
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir. But let me.
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households. Now, let me give you this point. You're saying that your operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than
but
what the previous
but
administration
to
did to our
acknowledge that-
economy,
to acknowledge
what the
there's a
previous
cost.
administration
You-
did
you
with
don't even
inflation,
know what the- you know
what
what's
the previous
upsetting? I reclaim
administration
my
did with
time. You know,
COVID,
Secretary-
and you're going to
Secretary,
lecture this
I reclaim
administration
my
about
time,
the
sir.
economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. It's one thing if you said, okay, it costs the American people $5,000, but we think it's worth it. That's what we've done in World War II and other wars. Here's what it costs. You got to pay for it. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your 25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence. It's the incompetence.
It's the incompetence. But what about Joe Biden? What about the way Joe Biden muffed COVID? That's what he's saying. Again, you're not, the only way you can win with a fascist, and that's what Pete Hegseth is, a fascist, and a war criminal, is to arrest him. That's the only way. He needs to be arrested. I don't want any physical harm to him or his family. I want him arrested. I want the laws on our books enforced. And you cannot humiliate a fascist or a war criminal. We've seen this, the Wiesenthal Center. We've seen what happened after World War II, how Joey Mengele lived out his life. They go on. They grow grapes in their backyards. We saw Eichmann. You cannot get a fascist war criminal to acknowledge that they should be arrested, that they're wrong. That's why they're fascist war criminals. It's very disturbing to watch Pete Hegseth. Again, do not want any harm, physical harm, to come to him, his wife, his children, his supporters. He needs to be arrested. He's a war criminal. Very simply. Very simple. So during the hearings, they kept asking, what does the war cost? And he kept saying $25 billion. So far, it's been $25 billion. That number's wrong. And he refused to say what it's going to cost. This is the Armed Services Committee trying to plan the 2027 budget. The White House is asking to give Hegseth's Pentagon $1.5 trillion, and they're asking for a $200 billion war supplemental for a war that's not a war. And Pete Hegseth could not tell the Senate or the House what the war cost or what it's going to cost. Unable to answer a question, he would ask a question by saying, how much are you willing to pay to ensure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? We had a deal in 2015, and they stopped trying to make a nuclear bomb in 2003. And now, because you can't reopen Hormuz, what are you going to do now about their having a nuclear bomb? What are you going to do? They'll keep Hormuz closed, as well as the Bab el-Mandab Strait. They can get the Houthis to do that, and then the Suez Canal is shut down. And then they're going to build a nuclear bomb if they want. And there's nothing you can do about it because you cannot deal with the military. There is no military solution to economic terrorism. I know that's hard for stupid people, stupid war criminal fascists to believe, but there is no military solution to economic terrorism. There's only diplomacy. There's only law enforcement, the use of our intelligence agencies. Bombs will not cure economic terrorism. Here is Senator Elizabeth Warren during today's Senate hearings, talking about the cost of the war and who's getting rich off the war.
Mr. Chairman, so Americans are paying a high price for Donald Trump's war with Iran. We've got 14 service members who are dead, over 400 more who are wounded. Prices are rising for nearly every American family. But someone is profiting off Trump's war. Insiders who know what's going on and who place bets on that inside information. On March 23rd, just 14 minutes before Trump unexpectedly posted about, quote, very good conversations on ending the war, traders suddenly bet $500 million on the price of oil, which, once Trump made his announcement, immediately dropped. It happened again on April 7th, and then again on April 21st, a surge in oil bets, then a Trump post, and then a huge shift in oil prices in just the space of minutes. It looks like insiders have been making out like bandits using secret information about the war. Now, one U.S. soldier has been charged, but that was for betting on capturing Maduro months ago. Not a single person has been charged in the many, many, many trades over the Middle East war. So, Secretary Hegseth, do you have any explanation for these perfectly timed spikes in trading activity other than insider trading?
Senator, all I can tell you is that everything we've done in our department, everything we've done with information, in working with the White House and across the interagency has been completely above board.
Well, so what does it mean? Do you have any other explanation other than insider trading? Do you have a story for why just minutes before there's an announcement, there's a surge in trading activity?
Senator, I'm more than focused on doing my job and ensuring we execute properly, which thankfully, under this administration, our troops have done incredible things in all these missions. My job in all of those moments is to make sure we're prepared. And that's part of the reason why we've been so successful in these raids, in these efforts, is that this joint force is prepared.
You're saying you're not paying any attention to this insider trading. Is that what you're telling me? That you've paid no attention to this? You haven't noticed it? You haven't done anything about it?
What I'm saying is we're focused on our mission of executing for the American people, and what happens in markets is not, in betting markets is not something we're involved in.
What happens in betting markets doesn't matter to you, even if the information may be coming from insiders in your office?
Senator, it's not something we're involved in at all. And of course, we take operational security at every level very seriously. In fact, no one's taken operational security more seriously than us. If you look at
Oh, really? Security? You mean the Signal chat? The two Signal chats you had, I think it was March 15th, 2025, when you were giving the coordinates and locations and times of airstrikes in Yemen? That Signal chat that you shared on an unsecure line? Two Signal chats. And then the one you set up with your wife, your brother, and your lawyer? Nobody cares more about operational security. You know, the great thing, this soldier was arrested for betting on the Maduro capture, and Donald Trump was asked about it. And he said, was he betting that it was for or against the United States? And they say he was betting that we were going to do it. And he said, well, I kind of look at it like Pete Rose. You know, it was all right for Pete Rose to bet on baseball as long as he wasn't betting against his own team, as long as the soldier wasn't throwing the war in order to win the bet. He doesn't see anything wrong. This is what I miss dope. I don't smoke dope anymore, but when I watch Donald Trump, I think, man, if I were stoned right now, I would just be laughing hysterically instead of weeping hysterically. More from Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts.
I'm also concerned about recent reporting on your own financial dealings with regard to profiting from the war in Iran. The Financial Times reported that your broker tried to buy hundreds of shares in a BlackRock fund invested in defense companies just before the war began. The law clearly prohibits the Secretary.
That entire story is false, has been from the
Let me
beginning,
finish
and
my
was made up out of whole cloth. And anybody that looks at it sees how it was
law-
worded from the beginning to make it look like I was involved in something I had nothing to do and never have. So any
law-
insinuation that I've ever profited other than serving this nation, what I give, what you give, what others give, I'm not looking for money. I don't do it for money. I don't do it for profit. I don't do it for stocks. And that's part of the reason why I'm able to be effective in this job. Because
Then
no
let
one
me
owns me.
ask my
No one owns this
question,
department. No one
Secretary
owns this
Hegseth.
president. And we
Let
can
me
execute for the
ask my
American people,
question.
and we
The
do.
law clearly prohibits the Secretary of Defense from owning stock in the 10 biggest defense contractors. Other senators and I sent you a letter with detailed questions about this, and you have not given us a response. So I'd like to hear you say, did you, through your broker at Morgan Stanley or otherwise, seek to invest in any defense-related funds right before Trump started the Iran war?
I'll give it to you as a big, fat negative.
Then let me ask you a second question. Is your broker getting your personal sign-off on any investment in individual stocks?
Bigger, fatter negative.
He's not getting your sign-off before he makes investments in defense stocks? Can I refer you to your
I'm not
ethics
making investments,
agreement?
Senator.
I am asking, does he know that he has to get your sign-off before he does that?
Of course.
The
I
time
don't know what
of
you're
the
looking for, but you
senator
ain't gonna
has
find
expired. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
I would like to enter into the record the ethics agreement that the Secretary of Defense has signed, that he will sign off personally before his broker makes any attempt to buy defense stock.
The great thing about these hearings is it's what if Meet the Press swore in their guests under oath, under the penalty of perjury. It's a different show. It's a different show. So pretty good stuff. Seth Moulton is a congressman from Massachusetts, and he asked, were you for this? You know, there's reporting in the New York Times that it was only you and Donald Trump who were for the war, and Hegseth refused to answer. And Moulton asked, why do you keep saying we're winning this war? And Hegseth said, absolutely, we're winning this war. It's, quote, an outstanding military success. Well, that's perjury. That's perjury. I don't see how the blockade of Hormuz is an outstanding military. It's not like they're going to be teaching that at West Point. And then Seth Moulton talked about the war crimes. Seth Moulton is a combat veteran, Democrat from Massachusetts. And there have been terms thrown around by Pete Hegseth where he's instructing our soldiers to have a warrior ethos where we give no quarter to the enemy. Well, what does no quarter mean? Because we hear that a lot. What no quarter means, according to the Geneva Conventions and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, no quarter means even if the enemy surrenders, we kill them. That means giving the enemy no quarter. And that is a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It's a violation of the 1996 War Crimes Act. It's a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's what our military is doing in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific on those alleged narco-terrorists. We're giving them no quarter. If there are survivors, we're killing them. We're not giving them an opportunity to surrender before we fire on them. And Seth Moulton, who served in the military, combat hero, said, this is against the law. And Hegseth said, no, all I'm saying is my soldiers fight to win. When I say give the enemy no quarter, I mean fight to win. Well, for all we know, Hegseth might not actually know the definition of no quarter, what no quarter means. When he quotes from the Bible, we already know he's quoting from Quentin Tarantino. So he's never really read the Bible. if he did, he'd be a real Christian. And so he may not know what the definition of no quarter is, but it means what we're doing, which is killing innocent people and not giving them a chance to surrender. That's why he's a war criminal. And he says, using his bravado, I tell my soldiers, no quarter, because our job is to win and kill the enemy. Well, you're not winning. You're not winning. You've lost this war. You can't open Hormuz, so you're shutting it down. You're a fool. You're a fascist and a war criminal. Here is my senator, Kirsten. I should know how to pronounce the last name. It's either Gillibrand or Gillibrand, but she's my senator. I'm okay with her. She's not AOC. Here is Kirsten Gillibrand or Gillibrand.
Let's talk about how you're prosecuting the war. What is your response to targeting that has resulted in the destruction of schools, hospitals, civilian places? Why did you cut by 90% the division that's supposed to help you not target civilians? And do you know the impact of a strategic failure at a war when you have so many civilian casualties? You may have tactically completed a mission well, but strategically is not meeting your goals because of the harms to civilians. What is the cost of that?
Let's leave time for an answer.
No military, no country works harder at every echelon to ensure they protect civilian lives than the United States military. And that is a ironclad commitment that we make, no matter what systems
And
we
why
use.
did you cut the department by 90%?
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. There'll be other rounds of questions.
He cut the department.
Senator Rand.
So there was a department within the Pentagon to look into ways to mitigate civilian casualties during war. Lawyers, and he got rid of 90% of the lawyers and the soldiers whose job it was to help figure out how to kill soldiers and not civilians during war. And we have come to learn that during war now, more civilians than soldiers end up dead. Okay? More civilians in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and probably Iran, more civilians are being killed than enemy soldiers. That's why an office was set up inside the Pentagon to figure out how can we mitigate what they call collateral damage. But let's stop pretending that we go out of our way to prevent civilian casualties. We don't. We didn't during World War II. We didn't in Vietnam. And we're not doing it. Part of the war is killing civilians. Collective guilt. That's how people like Pete Hegseth sleep at night. He says, eventually you got to blame the people for allowing the Iranian government to stay put. You got to blame the Iranians for not rising up against these tyrants. So that's the way war is. Civilians die during war. No, that's a late 20th century phenomenon. Very few civilians died during World War I. We got accustomed to civilians dying during World War II. Dresden, Berlin, Tokyo bombings, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Vietnam, gotta burn the village to save it. Part of war is killing civilians. So you can pretend otherwise, but that's our unsaid, that's our de facto policy, not de jure, de facto. So people say Hegseth, calling him a fascist is that really fair? Yeah, he's a fascist. And if you saw his opening remarks before the House, he said, our biggest adversary is not Iran's military. Instead, it's the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats, and he said some Republicans. Now, that is what fascism is. When the defense secretary is coming to testify before the House and the Senate, and he says, our biggest enemy isn't the enemy, it's the enemy within. Those are words directly from Hitler, the enemy from within. Donald Trump, throughout the 2024 campaign and today, keeps repeating this phrase. I truly believe that the undoing of the United States will not come from some foreign country. It's the enemy within. We have to protect our blood and soil. That's straight out of the Third Reich. So we are talking about a fascist. Quote, Pete Hegseth testifying before the House Armed Services Committee. The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans. He said, Iran isn't our problem. It's Democrats. Never before has a defense secretary been this craven, this patently fascistic, and wouldn't answer questions. He would ask questions like, what kind of price do you put on Iran not having a nuclear weapon? When you asked him, what is this going to cost? He says, I can't give you that answer. You never tell your adversary your plans. The adversary being the Democrats, Congress, the Senate. This is the Armed Services Committee, Senate and House, doing budgeting. He wants $1.5 trillion, and he's asked, well, you want this $200 billion war supplemental for something that's not a war. What are your plans? You never tell the enemy what your plans are. It endangers our troops. Just give us $200 billion. And by the way, we've never asked you for $200 billion. He denies that they need a war supplemental. Just give us $1.5 trillion next year. We can't tell you what the plan is. Just pay for it. Congressman John Garamendi from California was one of the many members of the House who accused Pete Hegseth of incompetence and reminded Pete Hegseth, this isn't a military success. You haven't won. All these intelligence reports are being leaked out of Israel, Europe, and the Pentagon that Iran has kept more than half of its ballistic missiles, its attack drones, they haven't really made a dent in Iran's arsenal. And we saw that. We saw that every day Iran was able to launch at least 15, 20 ballistic missile strikes, drone strikes. We saw that. We know that it's the United States and Israel that's losing its military capabilities. Israel has to, before the ceasefire, had to start rationing interceptors. Okay, so when Congressman John Garamendi asked that question, what did Pete Hegseth do? He said, who are you cheering for here? Who are you pulling for? So by saying we're not winning, by telling the truth, that means you're rooting for Iran. This is what somebody in the second grade says. It is the deflection playbook. I don't have time for this. And Hegseth, besides being a fascist and a war criminal, is a pathological liar. He says, we're winning. We've wiped out 90% of Iran's military capability. And he insists the American people are behind the war, that the American people support this war. Well, we've been over the polls. We know they don't. But if you're a fascist, doesn't matter what the people think. I'll tell them what to think. Here is my Senator, Kirsten Gillibrand or Gillibrand.
Secretary Hegseth, why do you continue to prosecute a war that the American people aren't behind?
First of all, I appreciate the opportunity for that closed session where we had a, unsurprisingly, very different discussion than we have here with the cameras on. We support this.
Because my job is to represent New Yorkers, and I can tell you, when I talk to them all across my state, they are furious, and they expect me to explain to them why they are furious.
And Senator, when I talk to Americans, and especially when I talk to the troops, they are grateful for a president who has the courage to take on this threat after 47 years of what Iran has done, targeting and killing Americans, and what it would mean to the world if Iran's nuclear ambitions were actually achieved. So the question I would ask to you and to others is, what is the cost of a nuclear-armed Iran? What is the cost to the American people if the world's most dangerous regime has a nuclear weapon?
But the truth is, they don't want war coming to this shore, and when you do a decapitation operation, the likelihood is going to be exchanged in the United States. There's no evidence that we are safer because of this war. We did not have any evidence that Iran intended to imminently attack this country in any way, shape, or form. So I disagree with your assessment that we are under threat.
Do you not believe them when they say death to America?
Listen, our adversaries use rhetoric all the time. What I'm concerned about is we are not safer, and I would just like to know why you have not sought the support of the American people, and 3 out of 5 Americans are against this war today.
I believe we do have the support of the American people, and we have briefed regularly what this mission looks like and why it's critically important that we undertake it. And I would remind you and this group that we're 2 months in to an effort. And many congressional Democrats, as I pointed out, want to declare defeat 2 months in. Iraq took how many years? Afghanistan took how many years? And they were nebulous missions that people went along with. This is different.
Give war a chance. It's only 2 months. All I'm saying is give war a chance. It's 2 months. It's a little baby. It's a baby so far. Let it grow into a quagmire. So there is no articulation of why we're waging this war. The White House said they were an imminent threat, that we had to bomb them on February 28th because we got word that Israel was about to attack Iran. And so we knew that if Israel attacked Iran, Iran would respond by attacking the military bases, American military bases, spread out around 7 countries in the Persian Gulf. So that's what Marco Rubio said. He testified. He said we had to attack Iran because they were an imminent threat. We knew they might retaliate after Israel attacked by attacking our military bases in the Persian Gulf. That was the first excuse. Then it was, well, we have to attack Iran because of their nuclear weapons ambitions. Well, didn't you obliterate their nuclear weapons ambitions in June of last year? Yeah, but we had to obliterate it again. And then we were told, no, it's to bring democracy to the Iranian people, to decapitate the regime and let the Iranian people rise up. But Hegseth is a liar, and he says we've had a clear mission, unlike Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam. We had a clear mission. We've had 6 or 7 explanations for this mission, but give it Give it time. It's only 2 months. You sound like all the people who were naysaying Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam. And boy, were the naysayers wrong, right, Pete? All the people who came out against Afghanistan and Vietnam and Iraq, all the people who kept saying, why are we doing it? They turned out to be wrong, right? They weren't willing to give war a chance. He says it's not a quagmire and it's not a forever war. No, it isn't, because we've already lost. And there's nothing, it's not a forever war. We lost. More from Kirsten Gillibrand.
I'm concerned about is we are not safer, and I would just like to know why you have not sought the support of the American people, and 3 out of 5 Americans are against this war today.
I believe we do have the support of the American people, and we have briefed.
We've already played that. So he was asked about firing blacks and women. And he said, I'm not firing black generals or female generals. I'm reversing years of social engineering inside the Pentagon that was orchestrated by Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Kid Rock, you might remember, used to come on stage with a Confederate flag. He may still. He also proudly uses the N-word. There was an interview with him in Rolling Stone magazine 2 years ago where he was throwing the N-word around. He's a good friend of Donald Trump's, and apparently Pete Hegseth's. There's been a problem now with Kid Rock, who uses the N-word. Read Rolling Stone. Doesn't understand why people object to him using the N-word. There was a military flyby his home, and it was questioned, is this appropriate for our military during a time of war, for the military to fly by his home and wave at him? And there was an investigation into this, and Donald Trump said that probably shouldn't have happened. Hegseth canceled the investigation into the soldiers who did a flyby. And then Hegseth this week went flying with Kid Rock, just flaunting all military code, all rules, all regulations. The law is what I, Pete Hegseth, declare it is. This is Congressman George Whiteside of California. And he wanted to know why an Army Apache helicopter flew over Kid Rock's Nashville home. I believe, I don't know when it was, but there was an investigation that got launched, and Donald Trump said, yeah, we should look into that. And here's Hegseth being asked, did you personally cancel this command-initiated review? Here is the question. This is Congressman George Whiteside, and I got to warn you, you're going to get the chills.
Helicopters. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask about the Army Apache helicopter that flew over Kid Rock's property on March 28th. An investigation was launched by the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade Command Leadership, but before that review is completed on March 31st, you terminated it via social media post. Did you personally direct termination of that review?
I did.
Okay. Now, the president said they probably shouldn't have been doing it and that I'd take a look at it. So did you talk to the president before terminating that review?
Well, I don't relay what I talk about with the
I
president.
think unfortunately that means that you did talk to him, which in turn means that you've just confirmed that the president himself overruled the leadership of the 101st Airborne. Mr. Secretary, you yourself have affirmed repeatedly the need for higher standards and higher accountability at every level of your agency. Commanders rely on established processes to uphold these standards. How does canceling a command-initiated review by the 101st Airborne leadership support a culture of accountability? Actually, I think I'll ask that of the chairman.
Sir, back to my earlier comments about the importance in my role of staying in the middle. What you're alluding to is, in my assessment, with deep respect for your ask, is a partisan question, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to answer that.
Sir, I actually don't think it is. I think it is actually a very fundamental principle of accountability in our department, and I think it was the wrong decision. I'm going to close by just saying one thing. Mr. Secretary, you started this hearing by politicizing it, and I want to make one point. Poll after poll shows that the American public does not support this war, and support is dropping every day. We are all representing our constituents, which is our constitutional duty. And to state that we are politicizing it is an affront to Congress and every member in this House, and I yield back.
You are politicizing it, Congressman.
A fascist war criminal has to get the last word. You are politicizing it, Congressman. This is how children, fascists, and war criminals behave. There is no negotiating, no appeasing, no humiliating a fascist war criminal. You arrest them. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I urge you to read the War Crimes Act of 1996 and then leave a comment, and you tell me if Pete Hegseth is or is not a war criminal. Again, I don't want him to be hurt. I don't want his family hurt physically or, financially or anything. I just want, we have laws on the books, and I want them enforced. That's all I want. I believe in law and order. I believe in law and order. And eventually, you got to stop blaming the people in charge. The American people don't want to hear it. I'm looking at polls. Trump fatigue. I don't want to hear it. I'm going to wait. A lot of you are marching, but not enough of us are marching. My sister's out there 3 times a week. Are you calling Congress? We're lurching very quickly. And they say it's happening at a pace faster than Hitler. That there are reports that no republic has unraveled as quickly as we have during the first year of Trump's second administration. Hungary, Poland, Russia, Nazi Germany. No republic ever unraveled their freedoms so quickly as the United States has in the past year and 2 months. Please subscribe, like this episode. That's the best way for me to remain in your feed, is if you, as they say, smash the like button. Leave a comment if I made any mistakes. I issue corrections. Thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you to the super chatters who donated money. I appreciate that. And Bob and Mila, thank you. Subscribe to my newsletter. This is also an audio podcast. And I will see everybody Sunday night live here on YouTube, 6:05 Eastern, right? 6:05 Eastern. Sunday night is the next live show. Saturday night, every night of the week at 8:30, we run a clip, a highlight from the show. And on Saturday night, we're trying to do like a watch party where I watch a clip and sit in the chat room and gossip with my listeners. So I'll see everybody. If you want to watch the clip with me at 8:30 Saturday night, it's a clip. It's not live. I go live at 6:05 Sunday night, 6:05 Eastern. Okay, went a little long, but I had clips, so that adds bulk. Thank you.